This episode is brought to you by Circle, the issuer of USDC, which hopefully, as you all know, is the preferred stablecoin of digital natives and crypto natives with over 1.5 million holders globally. You'll hear more about USDC later in the show. Welcome back to another episode of Empire. You got Santiago and I are co-hosting this one. We've got Uri and Eli from Starkware, two co-founders of Starkware. Welcome to Empire, Uri and Eli.
Thank you, Yano. Thanks, Santiago. Thanks for having me.
Hi. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy that you're here. Awesome, guys. Well, I actually want to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes relatively high level on scaling and then actually get pretty into the weeds of this. This might be one of the more technical episodes that we've done in a while. I think the first place I want to start is there are two ways to scale a blockchain, right? The first way is you can make the blockchain itself have higher transaction capacity. There are obviously problems with that. The second is that you can actually change the way you use the blockchain, right? Instead of putting all the activity in the blockchain itself. I just want to get your guys' take on why that layer 2 model is better. So maybe we could start there.
Basically, cloning a code base under that has a certain architecture and scale will give you pretty much similar scale, or it maybe initially it won't be congested, and then you'll think that you have much greater scale, but then the same limits of the technology will kick in. So, for instance, Polygon is essentially the same architecture as that of Ethereum, but with roughly 10x the rate of blocks. So you expect you'll get roughly 10x the throughput, and then you'll be blocked. By the way, even this 10x comes at a cost.
It's not the same architecture; it's the same software stack, and it's sixfold the block frequency. Okay. Otherwise, it's identical.
Yeah. But you'll get so you put in something, you crank it up 6 or 10x, you'll get 6 or 10x. And then it will get stuck, and then you could say, oh, let's have Schmolygon, and that will be 7x, and same thing, and you'll see it again and again. But this is not a very good way to get security. By the way, already here with Polygon, what users are paying with is that the level of trust and decentralization gets lower, and of course you repeat this. You'll get what you expect you'll get. You'll just get the same phenomena again and again. So what Starknet offers as an L2, and a very interesting L2, one based on validity proofs, is a very different technology. And it is one that uses the very same good old L1, which is Ethereum, but much more efficiently. It uses it as this very scarce and important and trusted resource that can assert integrity over a vastly greater amount of computation, even without processing that. So this is a surprisingly different and far more efficient way of utilizing blockchain. And it's a very different technology, and it just happens to scale much better. And with it, you don't get 10x the throughput. You could easily get 1,000, 20,000, 50,000, and 1,000,000x the throughput. And as we'll describe later on, these are not just theoretical limits. This is the way our technology is operating today.
We're going to get into things that, Eli, I know you are excited to talk about, things like computational integrity, delegated accountability, all of that kind of fun stuff. But we're going to have to dumb some of this down. For my brain is not as big as your guys' brain to kick this off. So I want to
I asked not to talk about the size of it.
I want to verify, I want to make sure I understand that correctly. So it sounds like the main challenge with that technique, like the other L1 technique, is that blockchains with these bigger blocks are more difficult to verify. They're likely to become more centralized. The only solutions to that are really to increase the efficiency of the client software, or to use techniques that like things like sharding, which kind of allow the work of building and verifying the chain to be split up amongst many nodes. That's the only solution on the other L1 side, and that's scalable, but not that scalable, is what you're saying.
Yeah. The state of Polygon today is a clone of Ethereum. So it's not yet as congested because it's not yet as popular. But if you have the same throughput or 6x the throughput, it will experience the same congestion and high prices of Ethereum. And this is something that has already happened when there were spikes of congestion on Polygon, for instance. So it's just the same thing.
And I would add to that out of the gate, far less decentralized, right? Far fewer nodes can run at that capacity. So the trade-off is well understood. You can increase the capacity, the throughput that individual nodes can process. By doing so, you're excluding smaller participants from the network, and you're hurting decentralization. There's no new physics involved in that trade-off.
And there's a limit to that. In the end, there's a limit. You could go to one computer, trusted computer, and that's known as,
Facebook,
the Visa, Bank of America, Citibank model. And it works very well, but it's just, it's not blockchain.
Yeah. Okay, so we're doing some process of elimination here. So we've eliminated the other L1s. Now we get into the L2 model, right? And so with the L2 model, there are two main models that I know of, right? We've got optimistic rollups and we've got the ZK rollups. So a lot of folks have heard about things like Optimism and Arbitrum have been in the news recently. Optimism did their token thing. Arbitrum has some interesting stuff coming out. Or they launched this thing called Nitro, right? So you guys have chosen, so that they do what's called optimistic rollups. You guys do ZK rollups, is my understanding. So can you guys just get into that model and like optimistic rollups versus ZK rollups? What's the difference?
Uli, do you want to take it?
Sure. Optimistic rollups basically rely on crypto economics to allow the network to scale. So instead of saying, let's compute all these transactions on the blockchain itself, you say, let's move these transactions and compute them off-chain. And a given party can compute those transactions, and in the process of doing so, stakes a certain amount of tokens in order to sort of ensure that it computes with integrity. Other participants observe its conduct, and if they can identify a fraud, and this is why it's called fraud proofs, they can submit, at least in Arbitrum. Arbitrum itself can submit such fraud proofs with Optimism. The fraud proof mechanism is actually not enabled just yet, but in theory, one could, an observer of the network could submit a proof of a fraud, and then the entity that's computed that computation that includes such a fraud gets slashed. So that's the incentive for those entities that help scale the network to conduct their work with computational integrity. Okay. Note that in the process, anyone who wants to monitor, say Eli is one of those entities. If I want to monitor his work, I need to have computational resources that are in fact on par with his, right? If he's computing 1,000 transactions per second, if I want to be able to check his work in a meaningful way and keep up with the pace he's going at, I need to employ the same amount of computational resources. Now, note that he's getting compensated by the network for every honest piece of work that he's doing. I'm sitting there waiting for him to slip, right, to stumble, and if he doesn't, my AWS bills are still keep sort of coming in, and I'm getting no income in the process. So there are significant challenges in the process. There's obviously the challenge there of allowing me enough time to check Eli's work. Okay, and for that reason, optimistic rollups have a window allowing to the detection of frauds that's somewhere between a week and 2 weeks. Okay, and so that's the window for finality. In the context of fungible tokens, this could be actually worked around, and you could sort of overcome this by essentially by funding, having liquidity provisioning fund this gap. In the context of NFTs or non-fungible tokens, there is not much you can do to work around that. And I think that for that reason, we haven't seen NFTs sort of get significant adoption with optimistic rollups. The approach we take is a fundamentally different one, with validity proofs, or as often called in the ecosystem, zero knowledge proofs. What you actually get is a system that can progress from state A to state B. In our highbrowed world, we call it from state A to state A prime. That's much more sophisticated than saying state B. Those state transitions can only be performed if there's a proof that can be verified that attests to the validity of that transition. So it basically is a situation where the world, before processing a batch of transactions, is in a valid state and can only transition to a new state following the processing of that transaction of that batch of transactions if that batch has a proof attesting to the integrity of the transactions in that batch, meaning every transaction has been signed properly and abides by some business logic that the network is willing to accept. Eli, you were.
I want to just give a very clear example to the listeners of the difference between the capability of an optimistic rollup and a validity rollup, which is what Starknet is. Let's take a very simple example. Suppose Yano, you and Uri are transferring one ether back and forth 1,000,000 times because you're playing some game. So you're bombing the mempool with just transactions that move back and forth, a single ETH, okay, 1,000,000 of them. Now, this should be processed and recorded on chain somehow by the L2. Okay, you're doing this on L2. So an optimistic rollup would need to put 1,000,000 signatures in an Ethereum L1 block, which doesn't quite fit in and costs a lot. Starknet would need to put one Stark proof with no signatures on the chain, and it will easily fit. So optimistic rollups, first of all, do not have that great scale. You can actually compute the limit of their scale, whereas with Starknet, in many cases, it's very hard to even compute the theoretical upper bound on the scale, okay? And this is not a mere theoretical thing that, if you play this game. If you take something like the dYdX system, which in every block has a processing of many, many, many Oracle price ticks, each one of them comes with a signature. So in an optimistic rollup, you would need to upload all of those price ticks and signatures onto the L1 for security reasons. And in a validity rollup like ours, you don't need. So you get much bigger scale. And also the security premises, or what are you basing security on, is much, much better and much more future-proof and much well analyzed and understood in Starknet than it is in optimistic rollups.
Can I just make sure I understand this again? Which is that, one of the differences here is that part of a transaction is only used for the verification and is not relevant to computing the state update, then that can be left off of the chain.
Yes.
But in an optimistic rollup, because that data would still need to be included on chain, in case it needs to be later checked in that fraud proof that Uri was describing. But in a ZK rollup, that doesn't need to get included on chain. Do I get it?
Precisely. Okay. You described it much better. Yeah, that's a much better.
Smack on, and just to sort of expand a bit on the example Eli gave in the context of Oracle service providers. Okay, for both L1s and for optimistic rollups, the Oracle services, whatever they are, Chainstack and others, their consumption of on-chain resources scales with the frequency of reporting, right? If I report the price every hour, every 30 minutes, in the latter case, I consume twice the blockchain resources. It scales linearly with the number of assets reported, meaning if I report on Ethereum the price of Bitcoin and Schmittcoin, etc., each new asset, I consume the same amount of additional resources. But it also scales with the security of the system, namely with the number of entities reporting that price, right? Meaning if it's only Yano who's reporting the price and we hack into Yano's computer, we can manipulate this price. If it's Yano and Santiago, we're in somewhat better shape. If it's 2,000 different entities, we're in even better shape, right? Because it's very difficult to tamper with. But all those 2,000 entities need to report provide their reports on chain with monolithic chains and with optimistic rollups in order for the general public to be able to say, hold on a second, for this past period, the median price of Bitcoin was whatever it is. With validity rollups, we can in fact prove to you, okay, that we've computed off-chain the median price reported over the past period, and that all these reporters appear on a whitelist of reputable reporters and blah, 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 and that the median is X. And all we need to put on the blockchain is that X, not the 10,000 or 2,000 or whatever. So in this context, we decouple the security of the system from the resources it consumes on chain. And that's a very big deal.
Okay. So I think I get it now. So obviously your guys' argument is that ZK rollups are much better. I think I get the argument, I'm pretty sure. However, like when you look at what's happened in crypto so far, you look at the two main scaling solution, like the when I'm just looking at TVL, like I'm not making any like judgments on who's better. I'm just looking at TVL. You've got Arbitrum's got like 2.5 billion, Optimism maybe like 1.5 billion. Then you take like a pretty big leap down. You've got dYdX is next, which dYdX is obviously built using StarkX. And then there's like a and then it continues to drop off pretty significantly. So I'm assuming the answer to why that
Sure,
is because it's
sure.
just a much harder tech challenge building what you guys are building, and it takes longer. But I'm curious to hear why these optimistic rollups have taken so much of a lead in the L2 space.
I think it's a very temporary and skewed picture. I'll explain why. First of all, even in the StarkX system, so many of our most successful customers are in the area of NFTs, which means, Sorare, Immutable, Miria now joined, and they have minted collectively millions of NFTs, actually tens of millions of NFTs. But if you look to, if you try to quantify those using dollars, then it doesn't show up as much or anything. But these are very, very meaningful and significant metrics that are not matched by any other system. I don't know how many, NFTs are locked up in, the combination of Ethereum L1, Optimism, and Arbitrum, but I'd be very surprised if accumulated it's more than 1 million over these three, the L1 and these two L2s, whereas we have close to or maybe surpassed already 70 million NFTs, again, used in games like, Sorare is a company that was valued at close to $5 billion, just announced an amazing deal with the NBA. These are, valuable things that are happening, and they're all happening on StarkX, but, they don't have USDC or Tether or ETH tied behind them, so you don't see it in the metrics. So that's one way in which is skewed. The other way in which it's skewed is that for safety reasons, and because we're in alpha, we are limiting artificially the amount of ether that can be locked and processed through the Starknet bridge, which means that you won't see as much TVL right now. Just because it's limited artificially as we're bringing the system to be more and more performant. So but if you look at other metrics, just to mention a few, number of transactions, number of NFTs, as we said, total number of transactions, TPS, and all these metrics, we are more than 10x the other L2s combined.
I want to add another dimension here, and that is that, say, with Optimism and Arbitrum, one can deploy Solidity contracts essentially as is. And let's put the security discussion aside, but essentially can be deployed as is in terms of the developer experience and the user experience. Now, our hypothesis, and time will tell if this is in fact the case, and with us, we're not there just yet. Warp is a transpiler from Solidity to Cairo that the Nethermind team has been developing. They have some big news coming up very soon. But it's not as the UX is not yet on par with Arbitrum and Optimism. But our hypothesis, let's say 2 years out, okay, 99% of the code that will run on Starknet will be code that was written in this 2-year period, okay, and in fact will never have run on Ethereum L1. Okay, this will be native layer 2 code. All this to say that if you think that 2 years out, most of the code that will be run on layer 2 is code that was originally written for layer 1, but then was deployed to layer 2, that's one strategy, and then there's a certain set of tooling that needs to be built for that. If your hypothesis is that the layer 2s will actually serve native layer 2 code a couple of years out, that's a very different ballgame, and we're preparing actually for the latter scenario.
Okay, that's interesting. So a lot of the code, you're saying a lot of the projects that we use or products that we use in a year, 2 years, 3 years will have code that is written today, and the code that is getting written today or next year is going to be written in native layer 2 code.
And I'll say why we think this. This isn't sort of us pontificating on the meaning of life, right? That we've seen this over and over again with the projects and customers we've been working with, right? So say dYdX had the good sense when they started building with us the system that they launched on StarkX. not to come in and say, and then we've told this story, over and over again. I'm it's not to come in and say, this is the logic we deployed on Ethereum layer 1. Please, deploy this, implemented in Cairo, which is the programming language that we've developed for Starknet. Please deploy this as is on StarkX or Starknet. Instead, they came in and said, hold on a second, let's start with a blank sheet of paper, right, from a clean slate, and say, if we were to build a perpetual contract trading platform, okay, what would we want it to do? Not what would we want it to do on Ethereum layer 1. What would we want it to do, period? And we started from that conversation. And what resulted was a system that's not only far more scalable than the one that they had running on Ethereum, it's a far better financial tool. It's a far better financial tool for traders, for users. And that in itself is that was a very telling experience for us, right? That those developers who come in and ask themselves, what is the right thing to build here, as opposed to what is the right thing that could run on layer 1 Ethereum, would end up with a superior product.
Let me. I think I was going to ask you guys about Cairo, so maybe this is a good time. So, like for context, you guys introduced Cairo 2 years ago. You just, I think about a week ago, announced Cairo 1.0, first major release for Cairo. I think in like the last 2 years, it gives Cairo 1.0 gives developers. I'm just reading from your blog now, a safer, simpler, more usable programming language. I had a question about it, which is, all right, so you mentioned Warp. Warp is this like Solidity to Cairo transpiler. Are there limits? Does using the transpiler have limits versus writing directly in Cairo? Or maybe the better question here is like, you mentioned that a lot of the code today is going to be written in like native L2 code. What about but like we have to keep in mind that a lot of the big projects today are written in like not L2 code, like the Uniswaps and Aves and the main like DeFi protocols. So like, would a Uniswap clone that is ported from ETH1 transpiled via Warp perform, like how would that perform versus a Cairo native Uniswap implementation? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would work, and you could go down that route. Two things should be pointed out. First, you can never use code as is that was designed for L1 as L2, even if you wanted to. So like, you would need to change things because the storage space is different and so on and so forth. So like, you're anyways going to need to change the code. And I guess my conjecture would be that even though it will work, you'll get more efficient scaling and performance, and even safer and more secure code if the main functionality of the smart contracts is written in Cairo, especially in Cairo 1.0. So though you could do something, I'll give you an analogy. Suppose there's some really good functionality written right now in Python. So could it be transpiled into Solidity and run there? I'm sure it can. I don't know if it's a very interesting thing to think about. Like, why isn't there any transpiler from Rust or from Rust or Python or C into Solidity, right? It's certainly doable. Why is no one doing it? And if you think about it, I think the same answer as to what, whatever answer you give is the same answer as to why, I think that native Cairo will be the better way to go. But you could take a package written in Python and transpile it into Solidity. Yes, and it will work. But likely its complexity in terms of gas cost is not going to be something you'll like. The exact same thing. If you take Uniswap and transpile it into Cairo, yes, it will work. But likely its consumption of L2 resources and also L1 resources when you run it that way will not be as favorable as if you, as the case of rewriting. And I just wanted to point out that on the Starknet ecosystem, there's actually quite a large number of folks who are actually building and writing AMMs in Cairo. So I think they're going to outperform, and someone there is going to be, the new year.
But maybe the argument then becomes like, well, it's not going to be an AMM model. It's actually like central limit order books will come to dominate trading because of the speed and the low fees of Starkware. Yeah,
even better.
May well be.
There's a reason there are no AMMs, on conventional markets. It's not because no one thought about something like an AMM. It is less capital efficient. it works on Ethereum only because of the decentralization and the gas cost limits. But if you have more favorable computation, yes, you're right, it's going to go away. That's good.
Eli's walking into a religious war, but I want to AMMs versus, but I want to say I'm not going to rescue him, but I want to say this though, that one way to think about this is, or this is the metaphor I have in mind, is that the folks building on Ethereum and the Uniswap, the very talented engineers at Uniswap would be one demonstration of that ability. They have the skill is to build sophisticated logic, as sophisticated as they can, that abides by the 15 million, or at this point 30 million gas per block. That's the exercise, meaning there's a ceiling, it's about a foot high, and the question is, can you, in that room with a ceiling that's a foot high, can you do somersaults, and can you do all sorts of acrobatics? And if you can, you're a wizard, and you really are a wizard, right? But now we're defining a very different environment, right? We're saying, come out into this green field and do whatever you want. Now you can go out there and keep demonstrating to everyone that you can do somersaults, abiding by this no longer existent 1 foot high ceiling. Okay, but that's sort of quaint at this point, right? This in 3 years' time, this is like saying I can fix typewriters. That's wonderful, but there are no more typewriters.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. Do you guys think?
All this to say that as we see it, the layer ones will be dominated in terms of willingness to pay, okay, by the verification of proofs. That's what we layer ones will become the security layer. So a star proof that's sent to the network to be verified, in terms of the number of transactions that it represents, it already represents hundreds of thousands. It will represent millions or tens of millions of transactions. So the entity submitting that proof, the prover, submitting that proof to Ethereum, it is willing to pay far more than any individual player submitting a single transaction. So we think that the individual transactions will be crowded out by market forces from layer one.
So I think Santiago and I are always trying to figure out like the second order implications of some of this stuff. So like what I'm maybe thinking about right now is right now Uniswap competes in this very like computationally constrained environment, but maybe in a world of like L2, like in an L2 dominated world, someone like Uniswap doesn't compete in a like less computationally constrained environment.
I'm willing to bet that's what's going to happen. Yes.
I'll add my ice cream to that. Yeah.
So who does compete? Someone who comes in and builds directly in an L2 world. Someone we haven't seen before.
Limit order. I expect you'll see things that are more like the conventional model of right. If you go to
central limit order book,
yeah. I mean, those are the things that work in the conventional world. It's not like people cannot think about the economic theory behind something like an AMM. It's just less efficient from slippage, capital efficiency, things like that. So I think, though there will be AMMs, I would put my bet on central limit order books.
And as we recall, it's not that Hayden started his career as a managing director at Goldman, right? He came up with this very exciting idea and built this powerhouse.
Well, I think he
sort of popping out of left field, right?
Yeah, I think he borrowed it from a post from Vitalik initially.
No, there was also the Banker protocol and a few others in Curve and so on.
Yeah. But all this to say that he didn't grow up in sort of the walled garden of Wall Street, and and that's the beautiful thing about blockchain. Right?
If you're if you're one of the I'd call it like the blue chip DeFi protocols, like a Uniswap or Aave, like you kind of know the old school DeFi, the tier ones. What would you be doing right now? How do you prepare for this like L2 dominated world?
Oh, we can tell you what they are doing, right? Or at least some of them. Aave is building Aave is building Aave version 3 on Starknet. Okay, there's a joint effort between the Aave DAO and Starkware, and the Nethermind team put on this like a little sort of a commando force that's building this out frantically. Maker, same goes, right? There's a joint effort with the Maker DAO building stuff for Starknet. Now I can tell you that in both cases they're sort of following the dYdX playbook, which is to say they are not simply coming in and saying, let us transpile line for line the logic we had on Ethereum layer 1 to Starknet. No, they're starting from a clean slate and saying, okay, this is a very different computational environment. What do we want to build here? And we're going to, I think, soon see some very exciting results in this regard.
All right, everyone, time for a quick word from Circle and USDC. As a crypto user, you know the power of stablecoins, dollar digital currencies that transcend borders, banking hours, and legacy financial rails. Well, Circle's USDC has quickly become one of the most trusted and widely used stablecoins. It's simple. People use USDC because of its composability, its stability, and its reserve transparency. And USDC isn't just adopted by a few of us DeFi degens and DAOs and NFT marketplaces, crypto companies alike. They all leverage USDC to diversify their treasury, asset management, and ecosystem-wide composability. The adoption's clear. USDC has grown to more than $50 billion in circulation since launching in 2018. We all have, and we all will, continue to take shots on our favorite volatile crypto assets, obviously, but USDC is one of the easiest ways to store your funds in a stable asset that can be used to send value around the world almost instantly. It lowers the cost of cross-border payments. It integrates into the growing ecosystem of crypto apps. As a seamless, trusted dollar digital currency, USDC is a 0-to-1 opportunity for the financial system. If you want to learn more about USDC, I would recommend you check out the recently published Transparency Hub on Circle.com. It's a great update to Circle's content on USDC. It outlines everything from links to their weekly reserve reports, monthly attestations, blog posts that are written by their exec team that highlight how and why USDC was built the way it is. Really recommend it. Just go to circle.com/transparency to access it. Now, let's get back to the show.
You guys have brought up dYdX twice. So I just have to bring it up. Like, we just had an episode with the Cosmos guys that just came out, and so the other side of the coin. What happened with dYdX? Because they built $500 million worth of value on StarkX, I think it was, and now they're moving to Cosmos. Can you guys just give your side of the story there?
It's very simple. First of all, we think of them very highly, and I think it's really great the teams are exploring and innovating. We think that the way to scale is not by going to a monolithic chain, but we respect the decision of our customers to experiment with that, and we of course wish them the utmost luck. Since this whole system is so great, there will be others that are going to use this technology, if not dYdX, and we'll see experimentation on both sides, right? On a secluded Cosmos chain and on multiple instances on Starknet and StarkX, and the markets are going to decide where they think it makes more sense.
Yeah.
I want to add to that a whole bunch of teams. Just wanted to add to that a whole bunch of teams saw sort of dYdX going from about $20 million a day in trading volume to essentially a couple of orders of magnitude greater trading volume on the StarkX instance that they've been using as a settlement layer, and sort of are building very, very rapidly to try and compete in that space. So I think in that regard, I think we are going to see a lot of experimentation. There was some flack that dYdX got within the Ethereum ecosystem, as how dare you guys desert the Ethereum universe and move on to Cosmos. I got to say, as much as we are sort of very sort of strong supporters of Ethereum and its ecosystem and its community, we take a very different approach. As Eddie said, we think that experimentation matters a whole lot, and sort of the quasi-religious view that this software stack that's 7 years old, this is sort of really the optimal software stack that humanity can produce in the context of blockchains, we think is exceedingly naive. That's why we're building layer 2s now. We're actually starting to also build layer 3s, but in this regard, we think that dYdX going out there and experimenting in a very bold way is a very healthy thing for the ecosystem, and we'll see how it develops.
I completely agree, Uri. I think it's almost comical, the religious fervor that gets baked around a software stack,
Yeah.
right? You would never, if
Yeah.
a SaaS company left Salesforce and they moved their CRM to HubSpot,
Yeah.
you'd never be like, this is blasphemy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how dare you? So,
Pitchforks and all that. Yeah.
yeah. Let me ask one more question about dYdX, which is, I think one of the main reasons that they moved was to like, what I read was like it was to maximize decentralization, and I think that was in reference actually to the sequencer. I'm just curious, like, what are the plans to decentralize the sequencer? Like, would this be done via an auction? I'm curious what the approach is there.
We're now thinking about it in the context of Starknet, and it will be, everything we do very seriously, and we lead the pack. So I think you can expect that it will be a very well thought, well designed, and something that doesn't break and makes a lot of sense. Just like all of our systems. I mean, some of the listeners may not be aware of this, but we've been running Stark proofs, which are acknowledged as very cutting edge, math and cryptography. Even among validity proofs, these comes from the farther corners of that universe, things that everyone discredited and thought that just could never fly. And we've put them into production with Turing complete language on fully functional systems that have been through multiple shocks to the ecosystem, price surges and drops and everything, and all of our systems have been functioning seamlessly. We have this, and when we say we're going to do something, we usually deliver either on time or before, and you can be damn sure that this will be, our performance also henceforth. So there will be very meaningful decentralization, and if systems want to have StarkX instances that need to be decentralized, those can be done as well. There will be decentralization to the need of markets and customers and everything.
Yeah.
So it's not really a technical impediment.
I want to add that in this context, the sequencer is, of course, dYdX, right? That's the entity receiving transactions from users and sequencing, determining what goes into a batch and the sequence of transactions in the batch. And Starkware functions as the prover. And those two functions, sequencer and prover, are going to exist in a fully decentralized fashion. Anyone who wishes to serve in those roles would be able to do that in Starknet and in the not too distant future.
What about I will admit I'm wading into territory I don't fully understand here, but as of now, there's no MEV on Starkware because of the sequencer. Again, wading into territory I don't fully understand, but my understanding is there's no MEV on Starkware because of the sequencer. How does that change once that's more decentralized?
MEV is a challenge. It's going to be an ongoing challenge in every decentralized system. So certainly once the sequencers of Starkware are decentralized, yes, it will, and there's volume there and value, then yes, MEV is going to be an issue that we'll need to contend with. Our very practical approach is that we have so many burning problems to deal with that this isn't our first priority, but many of the proposals to deal or partially deal with MEV go through things that we're either things we suggested or that we're very good at, things like using VDFs, delay functions, commit reveal schemes, zero knowledge proofs. So a lot of those are things that we are very familiar with and have been leading the pack on. So when we get to it, but I don't want to give any false impressions. It's not in the next two releases of the code, we're not claiming we're going to be dealing with MEV.
Yeah. Cool. What are the big priorities? I mean, you guys have raised what, 300 million to date, give or take, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, 270 or something. But like what?
We're very stable financially, and we have a team at this point of say about 100 folks at Starkware. There are more or less 50 people building out the Starknet ecosystem worldwide outside of Starkware, and many, many hundreds of Cairo developers that weren't around 6 months ago even. So I got to say, this is, for me, every time I mention this, it's a very moving experience to watch this thing sort of evolve in front of our very eyes. But the next big milestone is Cairo 1.0. I think this was mentioned earlier. Cairo 1.0 is essentially Cairo rebuilt for a decentralized world. So Cairo is the programming language that we introduced to mainnet in the summer of 2020. But that was done in the context of StarkX, of our SaaS offering. And that's sort of a closed system in the sense that there's a customer, say Immutable or Sorare, and there's a service provider, which is Starkware. And there are certain understandings in the context of that relationship in terms of, say, denial of service attacks and censorship and all that. You expect good behavior. In an open network, you can no longer expect such good behavior. And there could be denial of service, and there could be censorship enacted. So these are sort of two sides of the same coin, right? The denial of service is malicious behavior by people sending transactions, and censorship is malicious behavior by the sequencer or prover. And so to protect against these two things, and in addition to that, to make Cairo an even increasingly, so Cairo started as a low-level language and over time became increasingly higher level. So Cairo 1.0 is the language rebuilt for a decentralized network and made even more higher level than it's been to date. So that's the next big objective.
Nice. What about let me ask you about a couple other objectives I was just curious about. I don't know if these are high priorities or low priorities, but are you guys working on any other ecosystems outside of Ethereum?
No, but we have a very warm spot for Bitcoin, and we're supportive of their research efforts. If we saw or see a way to support putting Starks on Bitcoin, that would be something we'd really try to help, just because Bitcoin is the mother of all cryptocurrencies, the first, and we are on my Twitter handle I say I'm Stark Maxi, so that's what I'm Maxi about. I really believe in our technology and its ability to help scale all blockchains and then go beyond blockchains into the conventional Web 2 or Web 1 or whatever Web 0 world. So I'm very, very optimistic about that. And if you're optimistic about this particular technology and its ability to scale blockchains, you must be sort of supportive of all meaningful blockchains as they're going to adopt it. So
I'm curious, how would you rate kind of Cairo relative to other languages? And I mean, we talk about it evolving significantly over the years. There's a lot of developers, it sounds like, that are now onboarding recently into Cairo, but I've heard anecdotally that it's still fairly complex and difficult to understand relative to other languages. So I'm curious to get your perspective on that and how you can improve that.
Okay. If what you're about is ease of expression of whatever, because you want to write some app that, I don't know what, draws pictures on your computer, you want something else. But if you want global scale for your application on a blockchain, it is not just the best, it is the only path forward. And I think this is what identifies more than anything the community of developers. They are there because they see the potential. They see that this is a breakthrough technology made accessible in the fastest and most sensible way. And they understand that being, first steps, it's not going to be as well developed as other things. I mean, the analogy is, suppose you have your hands on the ENIAC machine and wherever it was, and I don't know where it was first, like one of those very first machines or something. So, well, if you want something really fun and cool to work with, that's not it. But if you understand that there's immense potential to be unleashed here, you're just going to jump up and down and get there. Now, I do want to say that, again, and I'm saying this not as a developer, but just as someone who reads crypto Twitter, the amount of enthusiasm and, elatement that came after the Cairo 1.0 description, saying that it's very much Rust-like and so on. I mean, there were multiple people saying, this is going to be more pleasant than writing in Solidity. And, it didn't come from us, but so there's that as well.
I want to say that it's a very fast-moving target. I'm still stuck on the elatement. I think Eli, in addition to innovations in cryptography,
can't you say elated? I'm elated.
The next
is it elation?
The next version of Merriam-Webster,
I'm gonna Google
but
it
an
right
appendix.
now.
Yeah,
Google
I'm
it
just
right
stuck on
now.
that. But I want to say this: that the maturity of the language, Santiago, is a very fast-moving target and a strong function of time. So just an anecdote: back in April in Amsterdam, there was a hackathon with 170 people, and there was one team that I met there, and I met them a few weeks later at EthCC. There was Starknet CC, which was just like mind. That was like anyway. That was like a massive festival of developers around Starknet, and one of the folks there that I met, I had seen him only like 6 weeks earlier, and he said the development experience is just fundamentally different. And I said, what do you mean fundamentally different from a year ago? He said, no, fundamentally different than it was at the hackathon 6 weeks ago. So a couple of weeks ago, this team building said, we're developing ERC 1155 in Cairo. And I said, hold on, guys, I think there are actually a couple of implementations already in place. And I sent a message on the sort of the core devs for Starknet on the Telegram channel. And within 2 minutes, there are 3 independent implementations, including one from Open Zeppelin, but 2 independent ones as well. So yeah, I'm just saying it's moving very, very fast. Right?
I have to, if your listeners are going to just take one thing out of it, let it be this. Elation, sorry, from the Oxford Dictionary. Great happiness and exhilaration.
Elation.
What did I say?
Elatement.
Really?
That we can check the records. Yeah,
the US version. I'll find you elatement. It's the old saxonic Celtic version.
Middle English.
Exactly. Elatement.
All right. Speaking of definitions, I learned about a new word this week, which was layer 3 scaling. I'm just starting to wrap my head around layer 2s, and here we go with L3s. And then I started reading about them this week, and I saw you guys are introducing the idea of L4s. So now this stuff's just going over my head too much. But can you guys get into L3s?
Yeah, L3 is like in Spinal Tap, where he shows the recordings. It goes all the way to 11. So this is L3, and Vitalik published a post this week, sort of expanding on the notion of L3s that we published in December of last year. So we're very proud of the fact that we innovate not only in sort of in cryptography and in the realm of zero knowledge, but sort of in the broad sense in blockchain research. And L3 is one such example. And the basic idea is a very simple one. So instead of having these scaling solutions settle their proofs by a verifier smart contract on Ethereum L1, do that onto a verifier smart contract that's deployed on a layer 2 system, specifically on the public Starknet. Okay. And by doing so, you essentially move that layer, whatever it is, a StarkX instance or a custom Starknet, you move that one layer up. Now, what do you get for that? What you get is even better scaling, meaning even better gas per transaction, and where it's sort of pretty astonishingly low numbers to begin with, right? Immutable is minting hundreds of thousands of NFTs to Rare as well for sub 10 gas per mint. That's 20,000x cheaper than they were spending on Ethereum L1. But you get even better scaling. You get even better control over your costs as an application that spends Ethereum L1 gas to settle its transactions. And we think that most importantly, you get better control. And you get control that you don't have in a public network, regardless of the question whether that network is Ethereum L1 or the public Starknet. Applications, it turns out, enjoy living in a public sphere because of composability, which is a hugely interesting capability. And I think we're only scratching the surface of what that can do. But there's a flip side to that coin. And that is what is often referred to as noisy neighbors, right? So if I'm a game and suddenly gas prices for me spike because there's some action on Uniswap, or inversely, if I'm Uniswap and someone's minting apes on the other side of the network and gas prices go nuts, that's your dog right there.
How's my dog?
So or a very big hamster. So I want to say so.
L3.
He heard about L3s. He came running up,
elated.
So no, I'm just elated that you can't hear Israeli drivers down in the street here honking like crazy at rush hour. The thing that they get there by not operating on a public chain is they get control. They get better control over their gas prices. They get better control over their the software version or the data availability solution that they introduce. So imagine something like EIP 1559. Okay, this is like the canonical example that I always give. Right, this was a very subtle and thoughtful process that took a good while to introduce into Ethereum, and for good reason, right? This is public infrastructure. You want to make sure that you don't screw this up. Now, you had to balance the considerations and incentives of very different parties, etc. Now, let's imagine that Yano has his Yano app chain, and he knows for a fact that 1559 is a wonderful idea for him. Okay, he introduces this into his environment, into his chain, just by building consensus within his own organization. He doesn't need to wait for the public chain to adopt this because he can do on his software stack as he wishes. That level of control is something that organizations care for, right? The blockchain space doesn't mean we're done with organizations as we know them today, with business interests as we know them today, et cetera, right? Profit still matter and control still matters. And these app chains sometimes want a high wall around their garden, sometimes they want no wall around their garden, but they need that control. And so we think that's what layer 3 will introduce.
So I mean, basically, so you got so the L1, like Ethereum, is for security and decentralization. The L2, we'll use Starknet in this example, is for like scaling basically, and like maybe composability and like general purpose scaling. And then the L3 would be for just more customization, like control and privacy and even more scale.
More scale and control. Exactly. More scale and control. You got it. Yeah, that's 100% right.
Uri, for the skeptic out there, how is this any different from Visa network, which is, for all intents and purposes, a big consortium? And
there's a huge difference, right? The huge difference is that everything here, it turtles all the way down to Ethereum L1, meaning if you say this is the logic that's going to be implemented on these smart contracts in that custom Starknet in layer 3, they're available for all to observe. This is the logic, okay? If that Visa decides maliciously to take all of Santiago's money and move it over to Yano, it cannot unless Santiago signed all his assets over. Okay. Today with Visa, right? They can say, well, this happened. You can call the 1-800 number, or take them to court. But you sort of assume that they act in good faith. Here, it's a very different equilibrium, right? Even if they're 100% malicious, there's no harm they can do other than censor you, meaning other than decide that they don't want to serve you, and then you opt out and go elsewhere, right? You go and transact elsewhere.
You try to bribe some other
there you go,
miner or validator.
Yeah.
Bribe in the good sense of the word, like just tip him. Yeah. But again, I mean, the thing that we constantly hear, and I'm not a skeptic of this, but I do appreciate that some people look at this and say, wait a minute, like, why do we need all this stuff? Like, you have hacks and you have other security kind of things that need to be figured out and other risks that are embedded into this equation. The idea, though, back to the example of Visa is, I mean, they are sort of like, they uphold a reputation and a business model that if they start doing things that, it compromises their integrity, then they're sort of sabotage. It's sort of like a Pyrrhic victory. And that's something that I think a lot of people in crypto and blockchain don't consider often, which is kick you out, block you, whatever. But at the end of the day, if they do that for a big subset of users, then they're compromising their business model. So
I guess some of the folks on this call are old enough and bald enough to sort of recognize the subtleties of the world as it is, and we're not of the camp that says, sort of down with everything. This is a new universe, etc. The world as it exists today, A, has a whole bunch of benefits and advantages to it, and B, won't just sort of vanish into the haze. As I personally see it, these set of call it trustless technologies, okay, they shift the needle in a way, okay, and maybe in certain areas they have no value, and maybe in other areas they simply reduce the degree of the way in which the powers that be can abuse that power, and maybe they diminish the margins, the premium that whatever insurance companies charge us. I think it's a little too early to say how this will affect the world, but I think it will overall be a very sort of positive force.
I want to say that we live today in an age where the pendulum has swung too far to one side, meaning let's say 50, certainly 80, 100 years ago, most of commerce was peer-to-peer, and finances was very much peer-to-peer. And by now, nearly all of it is electronic and centralized. And that's not good for, a variety of reasons. And what blockchains are trying to do is move this, swing the pendulum back a little bit. Now, even when it was peer-to-peer, it's not that there weren't banks and centralized institutions, and it was never fully, completely only peer-to-peer. But I think it was never, as centralized as it is today in the electronic age. And if there are no blockchains, it would be frighteningly so, with dire consequences all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the word you use there, a shift in the equilibrium. I'm curious in your conversations with perhaps projects or teams that are thinking about morphing their business model. Have you talked to a lot of traditional enterprises, traditional companies that are interested in deploying Starkware, using it in some capacity? We talk a lot about crypto native projects migrating to Starkware and deploying there, like Maker and Aave. But I'm curious if you've had conversations and the extent by which those are really serious of traditional companies looking to leverage this technology in some way, shape, or form.
We've had a gazillion of those. But first of all, if we look at the, empirically speaking, if we look at our deployed systems or the things announced, you won't see too many. You'll see zero, S&P 500 blue chips there. And even if you look, a broader view at all of blockchains, combined, are there things beyond the POC level? The answer is that right now, not so much, not yet. Maybe NFTs or slightly.
Yeah, but I exclude the crypto Twitter announcements. That I don't think that's sort of.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying you could say, like, in the NFT world, like you do see some blue chip things, whatever, NBA on Sorare or soccer. It's a blue chip thing, and it's making some appearance, but and there are very deep reasons for that that we can go into, but I think it's related to the previous thing. Certainly in the financial world, so much is trust-based, and basically you're paying a very high premium for those, big marble, stones at the doorway, and the suits that, are a social way of saying trust us, and that's okay. It's reasonable, but like trying to disrupt that ecosystem with something that basically says no, you don't need to trust, big suits. There's something else. It's just not gonna. It's not that easy. And I'm saying that now about all of crypto.
Maybe we covered this, but I want to go back to one idea. Obviously, now there's a lot of excitement around L2s. A lot of them are optimistic rollups. You have Optimism and Arbitrum. Arbitrum released Nitro that has some, performance upgrades, which are pretty interesting. And you're seeing some really decent activity. Is it fair to say that if you talk to these teams, I think they would probably tell you there is an upper limit. There is an upper bound to how much you can scale these. The Ethereum blockchain through an L2 via optimistic rollups. But of course they would say, hey, well, this is sort of like the transition of similar to how cellular networks evolve from 1G, 2G, 3G, 5G, LTE. Is that a good analogy to then assume that's how blockchains will evolve, which is maybe optimistic rollups are 3G, and then what you guys are doing is LTE, but it comes at a time where gas fees in Ethereum L1 today are pretty low. There's some activity in L2s, but I'm curious to, I guess the question really is, I'm curious to get your appreciation for how the sort of this ecosystem will evolve in these sequential waves of CapEx and throughput. Do you feel that you're building something that, there are some critics out there that say there's not a lot of usage and activity. There's not a lot of really interesting applications being built yet. Why build LTE when you don't even have a really nice smartphone yet?
I think our role and what we need to do is, and I'm saying now this about, as speaking as one of the L2s, but I think it's the same. I would say that it's really the same for our colleagues. They're also our competitors, but they are our colleagues and part of the same ecosystem at Optimism and Arbitrum and other places. Each should work as hard and as fast as possible to offer its scaling solution. And then, markets in the world will decide, and that's fine. And we'll accept whatever judgment the world passes. And then, each team is going to need to update or decide what it wants to do next. Let me give, you mentioned one example, and I think at some point in the past, various folks referred to it and said, maybe optimistic rollups are something for the midterm, and the long-term solution is going to be Starknet and, things like that. And yeah, that could be that, just like we see today, there's a lot of teams are now taking their Solidity code and deploying it on Polygon. So maybe after Polygon they go and deploy it on Optimism and Arbitrum, and this works. And then maybe at some point in our case, they're going to, for better or worse, they need to rewrite it to make it more scalable. They port it over to Starknet. That's certainly one option that sort of is in these phases. There's another possibility, which is that we outpace the other things, and once we have the performance and we do the regenesis, it'll actually see us eclipsing the others. That's another thing. A third one that I hope for us doesn't happen is that we never lift off and everyone's happy with whatever it is, Polygon or Optimism, or our role as leaders of one or coming from one L2 is to just make sure that this is the best technology and most ripe and usable by developers, and then we're gonna let the world pass judgment on how it wants to use it.
This has been great, guys. I think we should wrap it here. This seems like a good place to wrap. I have one closing question that I'm going to ask both you guys. And it's a prediction question. Uri, I'm going to start with you here. In 5 years, what percentage of crypto is built on, there's 3 buckets here. What percentage of crypto is built on L2s versus L1s, like the Solana, Avalanche, etc.? L2s could be you guys or competitors. And then the third bucket would be app chains, like folks who go over to Cosmos.
Oh boy. I have no idea. I think that the world, as value accumulates in these applications, is going to come to appreciate, perhaps in painful ways, the value of secure systems. And so understanding that a Cosmos chain like, say, Luna, and put aside the shenanigans and the criminal activity, but a network that's secured by the price of an asset that can suddenly tank is a very dangerous thing. So I think that Ethereum dominance in this regard, I think, is going to increase over time compared to the Cosmos chains, but there may be some innovation there where they demonstrate the ability to bestow security from one of those app chains onto others. And I think there are ideas and experimentation in that regard. And I hope they further explore that. But for now, I think it's going to be an Ethereum-dominated world. And I think that layer 3s are in fact going to be that sweet spot where applications can balance their needs to customize with their desire to scale in a verifiable and transparent fashion.
Eli, I'll throw the same question to you.
I have no idea about L1s.
That's why we
if anything, I would guess that in 5 years. Yeah, I think that in 5 years people will be speaking in other terms. I don't know what they'll be but I will make a prediction. I think that in 5 years, our core technology, Starks, maybe by then even ZK Starks, by then maybe we'll actually add privacy and the world is going to demand it. And, things like Cairo 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever is, that language is going to be called, like the whole tool chain that uses Starks for exponentially increasing, scale and offering integrity. That I'm very confident of. You'll see that 90% of the way, or the amount of transactions that transpire on all major blockchains, and maybe even it's going to start percolating outside to these permissionless or decentralized ecosystems. 90% of the actual game is going to be proved by Starks or ZK Starks proofs, and probably coded in some Stark-friendly language, which could be, again, Cairo 2 or 3.0, depending, or some other dedicated language that is very, that compiles into really good and efficient Stark proofs. Yeah. And you can, you can remind me in 5 years. I think that's where we'll be.
Yeah. I guess maybe I'll throw one last question, which is, I think Starkware, I think zero knowledge proofs have been in the conversation for such a long time. They're perhaps one of the more exciting elements of cryptography, at least is my appreciation. What are some of the things that you've been doing this for a number of years? What are some of the things that you thought would probably move faster? If you were to say, look back over the last 5 years, you would have thought, gosh, I thought that we would have developed X or Y much faster. And then conversely, what are the things that surprise you that have developed much faster than perhaps you would have initially thought? And I ask this because I think sometimes we're really impatient. We get excited about the technology, but we're impatient, or we sort of, it's that we underestimate what can happen in 10 years and overestimate what can happen in 2, kind of mantra that Bill Gates introduced.
I'll give my answer. So in May 2013, no one was mentioning scaling through proofs. I'm proud to say, I was the first one to suggest it, and I challenged the world to find a place where this was said earlier. And I said it at the Bitcoin conference in San Jose, and that's where I was red-pilled. And in that, half-hour talk that is recorded, and, I'm much younger there, I said, by the end of the summer, and this was 2013, May 2013, I said, by the end of the summer, we'll have basically the code for, it wasn't called Starks back then, but what essentially became, later on called Starks. I said, by the end of the summer. And then it took 5 years to release the relevant academic code, and yay, more years, this and that. So the speed at which code is built is, I've been, constantly over optimistic on this, but where I'm completely blown away is recently, with the amount and speed of adoption of Starknet and Cairo and developers flocking to it. And I think others, I'm speaking for myself, I didn't expect this much adoption rate so quickly, so soon.
Awesome. Great, guys. Santi, anything else?
No, unless Uri, you have a response to that, or just something in your mind.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic as Eli. So the super macro view, when we were undergrads, that was a fair number of years ago, zero knowledge proofs were with pride taught to us as something that is completely theoretical and could never ever be computed. The fact that there is now a general purpose programming language that allows you to prove any computational statement, that this is in production, that this has settled hundreds of billions of dollars over the past year on our software stack, that there are hundreds of people writing Cairo programs that we don't know and we never taught Cairo to. Mind-blowing to me. So I'm happy as a clown.
Elated.
As developers?
Elated.
Yeah, elated. Are there any other interesting, maybe not even in crypto, outside of zero knowledge proofs, are there any really interesting things, maybe not even happening in crypto?
Yeah. I'm working on hummus popsicles, and that's a technology that I've been perfecting for a good number of years. And
I thought we were going to invite you back on the podcast, but no more, my friend. That's it.
He's just trolling.
That's it. You're trolling.
You keep saying it's the last question, then you keep asking more questions.
All right, we're wrapping it. We're wrapping it here,
guys. Congratulations on all the progress.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming on in here and
thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Amazing.
Thank you. Very intelligent interview and very questions.
Yeah. This was wonderful, guys. Happy to chat anytime you want.
Yeah, we would love to have you on. I think the pace by which you guys are shipping and developing seems to be much faster now, Cairo, and really excited to see where that goes, especially how easy it is now, it sounds like, for a lot of developers.
Yeah, sure. Well, what are you doing next week, same time?
we'll have a ZK regular stand-up. But
okay.
yeah, no, thanks for coming on. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Awesome, guys. We'll enjoy it.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.